Today's daf is daf Ayin Zayin. Now we'll start here on the bottom of Ayin Vav on the base. V'chachomim over the Mishnah tells us v'medvar amurim b'mumin shebeseser. In other words, if he, the Baal, was aware of these mumim because they were golui, then sover v'kibel, then he accepted it. But if they're beseser and they're hidden mumim, then he could claim that had he known that she had these mumim, he never would have agreed to marry her. Omer of Nachman, v'nichve kemumin shebeseser dami. In other words, when the Mishnah speaks about the possibility in the case of mumin shebeseser that the Baal has a right to claim that he wouldn't have married her under those conditions had he known, that doesn't apply specifically to mumim that are in our body in a place that's covered. But even in a machla, which is called nichve, which he translates here as nefila, I think it's a kind of a vertigo. Do you know what I mean by vertigo? You know, where you can't keep your balance and you're constantly falling. So it's called machlas hanefila. She nofeles la'aretz machmas choli. And this is considered, as Rabbi Nachman says here, to be a mum which could be mavatal the kedushin, and it's considered like a mum shebeseser, such that the Baal Kitaina, had I known about this before the marriage, I wouldn't have married her. And why is that? Because it's not always feasible to check her out on this. You know, she may have certain bouts and moments where she falls, and when he checks her out, she's, you know, if she's in that state of falling, so she'll hide somewhere in the back room, and she'll only show up after after that attack kind of passes. So the reason why this is considered a mum shebeseser is because there are specific times when she suffers from this disease, from this ailment. Let's say it's a certain day in the month, on a monthly basis, or it's every X number of days. So therefore, since she anticipates that she will be suffering from this attack at a certain moment in time, therefore she'll make sure that she doesn't show up. She'll hide in the back of her father's house, and no one will know about this move. If, on the other hand, she has these attacks periodically, but it's not something that you can anticipate, it's not on the calendar, then then for sure we assume that the Baal would have checked her out, and he definitely would have found out. People know about it. It's public knowledge that from time to time she has these bouts, and therefore the Baal definitely knew about it. He can't claim that it was like a mum shebeseser. He would have asked and inquired about her, and he would have found out about it, and nevertheless, Nisratzabo, he decided to marry her. This leads us to the Mishnah here on the top of Ayin Zayin. What happens in the opposite case, where instead of she has mumin, he has mumin? And these are grounds for her to sue for a divorce. Ha'isha noldubo mumin, ein kofen o solahotzi. According to the Tanna Kama, we will not force him to divorce his wife, because we assume that although a husband is makpid that his wife shouldn't have mumin, because a man marries a woman and he wants her to be beautiful, etc., etc. But an isha is not makpid al kach. She's not so hung up on the way he looks, and this probably, in my humble opinion, reflects what we saw yesterday, Tavla Meitan Tavdu Meitan Armul, that metaphysical curse of B'chukasech. Omar Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel qualifies this statement of the Tanna Kama. It's not always the case that she cannot sue. But Medvar Amurim B'mumin Haktanim. There are certain mumin that the average woman would not be makpida. If it's a very extreme situation, the Gemara is going to try to explain what that means, that a woman will be mocked and then kofanos olahotzi. We can force him to divorce his wife. Here there's a very famous Rambam. How do you force a person to divorce his wife when he's afraid of the beatings that we're giving him in Beis Din? After all, he doesn't have das, and one of the preconditions of gerushin is das. And the Rambam is very famous in Hilchos Gerushin, I think it's Perek Gimel if I remember, and which he says that really his true ratzon is to fulfill whatever the Torah wants, and the Beis Din are representing the Torah, and therefore through this kfir we bring out his inner will. We're up to the Gemara now. Rabbi Yehuda Tani, Rabbi Yehuda has in our Mishnah Noldu. What is Noldu Mo? That these women showed up after the Nesuin. And even so, she wants to claim, I can't live with him. We're not going to force him to divorce his wife. But Chiya bar Rav Tani, he has a different version of our Mishnah. And that's not Noldu, but Hayu. Hayu means that even before he married her, he had these movements. Only in that case do we not force him to divorce her. But if these women came into being and emerged and became clear and known during the course of the marriage, then for sure we will force him to marry her. To divorce her. So there's a major machlokas here between Rabbi Yehuda and Chiya in the case of Noldu. According to Rabbi Yehuda, even though it's Noldu, we cannot compel him to divorce her. But according to Chiya bar Rav, if it was Noldu, then we would force him to divorce his wife. She didn't know anything about it. Mandi Omar Noldu, according to the Shita of Yehuda, Noldu is Kolshkein Hayu. How much more so in the case of women that she would have known about, because these were women that emerged before the marriage. We would not force them to be motzi because of the kibbutz, because she knew about it and she accepted it. She went into the marriage with that understanding. Umandi Omar, but according to Chiya bar Rav, Hayu, but if these women manifested themselves during the course of the marriage, then in that case we don't apply the principle of ein kofanos olahotzi. On the contrary, kofanos olahotzi. And now the Gemara wants to bring a proof to the text, the version of Rabbi Yehuda, and that becomes a kasha, of course, on Chiya bar Rav. Tonight it says in our Mishnah, Rav Shimon Gamliel. When do we apply this principle that ein kofanos olahotzi? That's b'murin ketanim, b'murin gedolim, is so profound. Kofanos olahotzi. So the Gemara says the following: if you have the Girsid Mishnah of Rabbi Yehuda Noldu, then we're talking about in our Mishnah the emergence of mumin during the course of the Nesuin is Hainu Deshani. That justifies this distinction of Rav Shimon Gamliel ben Gedolim L'Ktanim, meaning that we're saying that according to the Girsa of Rabbi Yehuda, that we're talking about Noldu, that even though she didn't know about these women, nevertheless she cannot sue and force a divorce. And that's where we say, but wait a minute, that's only Mumin Ketanim. But if it would have been Mumin Gedolim and she didn't know about it because it was Noldu, then she has rights to sue for divorce and will compel him to divorce. Elamandi Omer, but according to the Girsa of Chiya bar Rav, Hayu is Mali Mumin Gedolim Mali Ketanim, Hasavra v'Kibla. According to the Girsa of Chiya bar Rav, our Mishnah is talking about a case of Savra v'Kibla, meaning Hayu. He always had these movements. They manifested themselves before the marriage. So she went into the marriage knowing full well that he has these movements, and therefore she doesn't have grounds for divorce. And therefore there's no difference between Gedolim and Ketanim. Even if it's Mumin Gedolim, if she accepted it, Because then there should be no grounds for divorce. So how do we understand Rav Shimon Gamliel's distinction? And the Gemara answers, "Kasvuri sheyachol lekabel." True, when she went into the marriage, he had these mumen gedolim, and she thought, I'll somehow be able to survive it and live with it. But the Achshav, after the marriage gets off the ground, then she realizes, Ein Yachol L'Kabel. She comes forward and she says, I wasn't aware of the fact that I could suffer with this. That I could not suffer with this. I cannot tolerate this. But if he, the Baal, manifested Mumen Ketanim, and these Mumen Ketanim emerged and were known before the Nisuin, she can't come back and say, well, you know what? I thought I could live with it. Now I can't live with it. It doesn't make sense that she could claim that she can't live with Mumen Ketanim in a case where she'd accepted it and knew about it at the time of the marriage. The Eilei Mumen Gedolim, what constitutes a move that's so profound that she can claim, I can't live with him? Rav Shimon Gamliel gives three examples. Kigon, Nismeis Eino, he's blind, he got blinded in one eye. Nikta Yodo, never, his arm was amputated. O Nishba Raglo. What's the case here? It says, Nistaba Eino Achas, Nikta Yodo O Raglo Achas. Again, I'm not sure how you fit this into the language of the Shas, because the Gemara used the word Nishba Raglo, but the commentary says Nikta Raglo. One of his legs was amputated. Now, how do we know it wasn't two eyes and he became totally blind, or two arms that were amputated, two legs? Because in that case, then everyone would agree that we force him to divorce his wife, because that's considered as if he's batul min ha'olam. He can't function at all in this world. And our Mishnah indicates that there's an issue here and a contention between Tanakama and Shimon Gamliel about whether we compel. And therefore, if we're talking about Mumen Gedolim, where he can't function at all, he's blind, never, then for sure that could not be an issue of dispute, which is recorded in our Mishnah. Itmar, Rabbi Abu Bar Yaakov Homer Rabbi Yochanan, Allah Rav Shimon Gamliel, in the case of Mumen Gedolim, we will force the husband to divorce his wife. However, Rav Amar B'Shem Rav Nachman, Halacha Kidiri Chachomim, and we did not compel the husband to divorce his wife, even in the case of Mumen Gedolim. So if when we read the Mishnah, we had any doubts as to whether or not there's machlokas between Tanakama and Rav Shimon Gamliel, here we see explicitly there is such a machlokas. And the Gemara asks, Rabbi Yochanan Hachli, is it really true that Rabbi Yochanan ruled in favor of Shimon Gamliel? So don't tell me that Rabbi Yochanan, you have a tradition in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that we pass on Shimon Gamliel in our Mishnah, and under the category of Mumen Gedolim, we will compel him to divorce his wife. This is a universal rule that whenever Rebbe writes Rav Shimon Gamliel's view in a Mishnah, we pass him like Rav Shimon Gamliel. There are only three exceptions to this rule. But barring those exceptions, as a universal principle, we always accept the view of Rav Shimon Gamliel. So why did you tell me that Rabbi Yochanan Paskins like Rav Shimon Gamliel in this Mishnah, implying that this is the exception to the rule? And the Gemara answers, Amoroi Miu al Liba de Rabbi Yochanan. There's machlokas between Amoroim according what is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. According to Rabbi Abu Bar Yaakov, Rabbi Yochanan never said a universal principle halacha of Shimon Gamliel. And according to the second version of Rabbi Bar Chana, Rabbi Yochanan said halacha kimoso b'chol makom, including in our Mishnah. Now, what are these three cases of Orev, Sidon, and Raya Achrona? So the first case which is the case of Orev, is a sugi at the end of the Masechet Bava Basra. Rav Shimon Gamliel paskins that if the lova has nechasim, then the malva cannot collect from the Orev, from the guarantor. Although the Chacham disagree there, they said even if the lova has nechasim, the malva has recourse to collect directly from the Orev if he so desires. Then we have Sidon. This is a Maisa that took place in Sidon as recorded by the Gemara Gitna in Dalit. A man said to his wife, "This is your get on condition that you'll give me a certain garment," and that garment got lost. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel paskins that since she obligated herself to give her the garment is lost, she has to pay its value. The Chacham disagree, and they said that his intention was dafka to give her that particular garment, not its value. Once again, we're going to pass like the Chacham against Reb Shimon Gamliel. And finally, the last case of Raya Achrona is in Sanhedrin Lamed Aleph. Reb Shimon Gamliel says that if the defendant brings witnesses or invokes any sort of proof to support his claim, his Titus Torah, and this happened after the Psak Din, the ruling was already delivered. Rav Shimon Gamliel says we could be so ser as Psak Din, we start from the beginning because now the defendant has new evidence to support his claim. The Chacham disagree. Once it was a Psak Din, we're not going to be so ser the Psak Din. The Mishnah says, in the following cases, if the Baal manifests very extreme movement, then we will force him to divorce his wife. And we're going to see, as we go through the sugya, that the list enumerated here falls into two distinct categories. Most of the cases are for the benefit of the wife, because she can't tolerate living with such a husband. Some of the cases will be for his benefit, that the continued marriage is going to harm him, and therefore, even if she says, "Oh, I'll live with him," he will divorce her. In any event, the first case is what's called mukashchin, and mukashchin is listed in the 9th chapter of Negoim as a makar shel chom she'ena machmas eish. In other words, sometimes chas v'shalom you get burnt, and as a result, there's all sorts of infections and so forth. But here we're talking about a case where he has a kind of a bua. Bua is like literally a bubble. What would you call it in English? His skin is full of boils, not bubbles, let's say boils. And these boils are not a result of some sort of a contact with, heat, like a 3rd-degree burn or something like that. So his skin becomes kind of like destroyed, and as a result, he has these boils. His body is covered with boils. Then we have Baal Polifos. Okay, the Gemara is going to talk about that. We have Makamitz, Mitzaref, Nechoshes, Vabursi. These kind of tanners or all these kind of occupations with metals cause the Bali Uvnis or Reach Ra. Bein Shahoyu Achelo Nisu Ubein Mishanisu Noldu, meaning that even though, according to the Tanakhama, she knew about these movements, she knew about the occupations that he was dedicated to, but nevertheless, she didn't realize that she can't tolerate, she can't live with that husband. Regarding all the categories of movement, even though he made an explicit condition with her, and he said to that I have these movements, I'm not hiding anything from you. Nevertheless, I realize now I can't live with it. Chachama Omrim, the Chacham say regard to all the different categories of mumen that were enumerated in Mekabelis he al Korcha. She'll remain married to him against her will because he made this t'nai. I mean, here we have a major machlokas rishonim as to what the Gemara has in mind here. According to many of the rishonim, only in a case where she saw the mumen before the nisuin, and then even though he didn't make a t'nai, she was mekabelis. But other Rishonim say, no, it's not enough that she saw the mumen, but on top to boot, he has to have made that explicit t'nai. And if he didn't make that t'nai, she would have a right to say, I made a mistake here and I got to get out of this marriage. Mukashkin is going to be a case where we don't have to go into the question, did she know about it and she saw Ramakabla and she accepted it. In all situations, we will force the Baal to deliver get. And that's because this was a separate Takonis Chachomel, as we'll see in the Gemara, in order to allow him and facilitate his ability to be Makai in the mitzvah period and have children, Mipneshim and Makoso, because a mukashkin, as a result of tashmish amita, will cause his skin to fall apart. So tashmish amita is very dangerous for a mukashkin, and therefore it's for his benefit that he terminate this marriage. Now look, you could say that she accepted living with this tanner even though he smells bad, but that doesn't mean that she can live with any bursi. So therefore, if her husband, who's a bursi, dies, bursi, and likewise, the yavam is a bursi, the fact that I was able to tolerate a marriage with a bursi doesn't mean that I can live with every bursi. I can't live with you. And therefore, the Rabbanan will establish that in this case, he will have to give her chalitza and not yibum. The Gemara says the following. My Baal Polipos. What is a Baal Polipos? What is this move? Amar Rav Yehuda v'Shmuel, Reach HaChotev. There's a very foul odor that comes constantly from his nose. I'd be curious to know if you could Google this, if we know exactly what this disease is. The Masniseton, on the other hand, despite what Shmuel says, we have a brisa that says the opposite. That what is polifus? Reach hapeh. It's bad breath. So the Mefarshim here try to understand how could Shmuel reconcile himself with this brisa. Shmuel doesn't have the right to disagree with the brisa. So we're going to have to assume that Shmuel is talking about one case and the brisa talk about another case. And there's no steer between the two. And this is a long footnote here in the Mesifta. He says that if you look at the Mesorah Hashas, this brisa is quoted the name of the Ri Bar Yehuda. He says that Baal Polifos is Reach HaPeh, but the Lechem Abirim and the Maram Shif, they understood the Gemara is not referring to a brisa that says Polifos is Reach HaPeh, but to a different brisa. And that other brisa is not necessarily referring to Polifos. Rav Asi Masli Ibcha, he has the exact opposite text in this machlok. Shmuel is the one who says Polifos is Reach HaPeh, and the brisa holds is Reach HaChotev. And I'll give you a simon to remember that it's Shmuel who is talking about Reach HaPeh, because Shmuel lo posik pumi mikule pirtin. This perek, which we're learning on Madir, was never far from Shmuel. He was always involved in this parak. And the Mepharshim say, if you go through this parak, you'll see over and over again that Shmuel is quoted. My mekamitz, what does the Mishnah refer to that kofinos lehotzi because he's a mekamitz? I thought it meant a stingy guy. Rav Yehuda, mekamitz really means mekamitz. And what is mekamitz? What does a man collect? Soas klovim, excrement of dogs. So wherever he finds dogs' excrement, and I can tell you right here on my street, he would have no problem with finding any of that. And Rashi tries to figure out why is he collecting soas klovim. And Rashi says he doesn't know why, but Rashi elsewhere in Brachos on Daf Kafei tells us that soas klovim asuyo leibud oros, that it's beneficial for the tanning of skins of hides. But of course, she can't tolerate this. You can imagine what the man smells like. Meisvei, I'll ask you, Kash, from the Brisa, mekametz zebursi. The Brisa identifies mekametz as bursi. He's the ma'avid oros. So you can't tell me that mekametz means he's the mekametz soas klovim. So now the Gemara throws the kasha back in the face of the Makshan. And you understand this Brisa? The Mishnah itself has mekametz and bursi listed as two separate categories. So according to you, based on your reading of the Brisa, that mekametz equals bursi, how come the Mishnah is listed as two separate categories? Where it says the following, I would not be bothered by the stira kaviyachol between the Mishnah and the Brisa. Why? Kan bebursi go, kan bebursi kata. The Mishnah that says bursi is talking about a bursi gadol. And when the Mishnah speaks about mekametz, that's a bursi katan. And therefore, there's no stira because the Brisa that says mekametz is a bursi, he's referring to a bursi katan. Now, there's a long discussion in the Mefarshim. Why do you have to tell me bursi gadol once you told me bursi katan? I mean, if there's grounds for divorce in a bursi katan, how much more so in a bursi gadol? So the Shita Mekubetz's answers that there's one element in the bursi katan that's even more objectionable than a bursi gadol, and that is that a bursi katan is a very, very poor man. So in addition to the smell of the tanner, the foul odor, there's another difficulty in living with this man because he's so poor that he's desperate and he took upon himself this kind of occupation. But let's go back to Rabbi Yehuda. He said that mekametz is mekametz soas klovim kasha. And where it says tanoihi. In fact, this issue is a matter of contention amongst Tannon. The Sanya we learned in the Brisa, mekametz ze bursi. Yesh omrim ze mekametz soas klovim. So Rabbi Yehuda holds like this second opinion that's mentioned in the Brisa of the Yesh Omer. The Mishnah says, "I'm etzarif nechoshes v'bursi." My etzarif nechoshes, Rav Ashi Omar, Chashle Dudi. If I understand correctly, check me out in the English if you can. He's in charge of taking copper and smashing it down and like pulverizing it. And when you do that, then the nechoshes, the copper becomes soft and malleable, and then he can shape it into, let's say, a pot. And as a result of this activity, then pneim v'chol gufa mifuchamim. So I guess it's a kind of a blacksmith, and his face and his body become full of like the soot and the charcoal, and it's repulsive, it's dirty, it's filthy, it's got a foul odor. Rabbi Bar Huna Omar, Bar Chana Omar, Zeh machatek nechoshes meikara. He's what you call a chotzev nechoshes. He goes back to the quarries, where you find the copper in the ground, and he takes it out and cuts it out of the ground. And there too, in that place, there's a terrible foul odor, which now becomes attached to his body. Tanya Kavose Derabba Baravachano, we have a Bryce to support this, says in Mitzarev, Zemachatech Lechoshes Meikor, Meikor again in the source, in the ground. He's mining the Choshes. Omar Rav HaOmer, Eini Zon, the Eini Mefarnes Yotzevi Teksuba. The man says, I declare, henceforth, I'm not supporting my wife. And Rav is quoted as saying that he has to give a get and he has to pay the ksuba. I don't get it. Why do we force him to divorce his wife? He has to support his wife. Also, Rabbi Losa Yovel Shmaita, Kavi the Shmuel. Rabbi Losa heard the statement of Rav, and he reported it, he transmitted it to Shmuel. Omar Shmuel says, Achsule Sari Lialosa. Feed him barley. Very harsh language. What does it mean, barley? Barley is typically Michael Behema. He's talking like a Behema. He's not talking like with any das. Ad Shekofro Solahotzi, Yichfu Lazun. We have to force him to support his wife. He can't just make a declaration, well, I'm not going to support my wife and get away with it. So now the Gemara wants to know, so what was Rav thinking? And why did he say no? We're going to force him to divorce his wife. The Gemara says, "Ein on a door nachash b'kfif." You can't live with a snake, a serpent, in one barrel, in one basket, because you can't constantly be careful and protect yourself from this dangerous serpent. And here too, this is an ongoing volatile situation. A husband who says at one point in his marriage, I'm not going to support my wife. So what are you going to tell me? Oh, we're going to force him to divorce his wife. Are you going to be able to guarantee for the rest of his married life that this man will support his wife? Are you going to stand over him 24/7, 365 days a year and guarantee that he's giving parnosa to his wife? Eventually, he's just going to stop doing so. And therefore, says Rav, Kofano Solahotzi. Kisolak Rab Zera, when Rab Zera came from Babel Teretz Shel Ashkechel, Rab Binyamin Bar Yefes, the Yosef, the Karmel, Mishmei, Rab Yochanan. So the statement was said in the name of Rab Yochanan, like it was said in the state of Rab, that Kofano Solahotzi. Amalei, so Rab Zera says, Alda Aksua Sa'arin Lalazer Baba. On this statement, Rabbi Lazar was given a cloth. They forced him to eat barley in Bava. But nevertheless, we see that not only Rav holds that Kofno Solahotzi, but even Rabbi Yochanan holds Kofno Solahotzi. And here there's a tremendous machlokas haposkim. How do we paskin? On the one hand, the Gemara dramatizes the response of Shmuel to Rav's statement and Rabbi Yochanan's statement. So it sounds like we paskin like Shmuel, and we also have halacha that in Dini Mamanos we paskin like Shmuel, and this case is relevant to the payment of the ksuba. But on the other hand, we have both Rav and Rabbi Yochanan who disagree with Shmuel. We're not going to force a husband to divorce his wife unless he's married to a woman that he's not allowed to be married to. It's an illegitimate, illegal marriage. Shmuel is going to interpret and reveal the intention of Asi. Kigon, who are these? What are these cases of illegitimate marriages? Almona l'kohen gold, Hushva chalutz kohen hejod, Mam says Nasi Israel, Bas Yisrael l'nosim l'mam. What's counter to all these cases? Rashi indicates they're all Isur Doraisa. Now this is problematic because on the list we have chalutza to a kohen. The Gemara says explicitly in Yevamos Daf Chof Daled is only an Isur D'Rabbanan. And even though Rashi in the Masechet Makkos Daf Yud Gimel derives the Isur of chalutza to kohen from the extra word ve'isha in the pasuk of Vayikra Chaf Aleph, ve'isha grusha ve'isha lo yikachu, Nevertheless, that's only an asmachta, and it's not a din d'oraisa. So Tosfos explains that Agav, once he mentions Grusha, he throws in Chalutza as well. Apparently, though, the Sina is d'oraisa. We don't believe that they were misguided. So he did him a good. Aval nasa isha v'shah ima eser shanim v'lo yolda ein kofin oso. We're not going to force a man to divorce his wife if they were married for 10 years. He hasn't fulfilled the mitzvah period of Arivia, and it's a childless couple. Now, there's a Rashi here that's quoted by the Shita Mekubetzes that even though we don't force him to divorce his wife, nevertheless, we're going to force him to marry another woman because he's obligated the mitzvah period of Arivia. So he can fulfill the mitzvah period of review without necessarily divorcing his wife, who is childless, by marrying another wife. In other words, Shmuel is quoted as saying, we're not going to rely on the fact that he's going to marry a second wife. He's not going to marry a second wife. And not only that, he's not such a great catch on the market because he has a wife. So therefore, for the sake of period of Arivia, we better make sure to force him to divorce his wife. We're not going to rely on the possibility that he's going to marry a second wife. Yeah, it's interesting because this is the same Shmuel who in the previous sugya says we don't force him to divorce his wife because we're going to force him to support his wife. He said in our Mishnah, we have this list of Mukashkin and Bal Polifas, and we have the Kamitz, and the Tzarif Nechoshes, and Bursi. And it's mashma only in these cases we force him to divorce his wife, but not in the case of Shah Imai Shana Bishlei Ravasi. Ravasi, the way that Shmuel interpreted him in the first Mishnah was that only in the case where he marries a woman illegitimately, then we force it. And therefore, the Mishnah omits the case of Shah Imai Shani. It's the Rabbanik Tani, the Rabbanik Tani, the Raisa Lo Tani. One second. So again, I'm not sure why is it more differentiate between the Rabbanan and the Raisa. Just 1 second. The Rabbanan Tani. Just 1 second. So I think what the Gemara is saying here is the following: that according to Rav Asi, who says that we're talking about psulos, well, according to Rav Asi, that in the case of psulos, he's obligated to divorce his wife. So that's already a doraisa halacha, and the Mishnah didn't even bother mentioning that. The Mishnah omits all cases of psulos because it's only interested in Darabanan. In other words, those Bali Mumim or Umnius that have a foul odor and are listed here, they're not Asuros al Baleim, there's no Isa. And the Mishnah wants in Mechadish that this is grounds for divorce, and that's a rabbinic law. El Rav Tachlifa bar Avimi. According to Rav Tachlifa, who says that Nasa Isha Kofin Osa, the 10 years went by, is listening Nasa Isha V'Shah Imais V'Shon V'Lo Yolda Kofin Osa. That's also a case where the Rabbanan made a takana that we have to force him to divorce his wife. We're not going to rely on the fact that he'll marry another wife. Or Rav Nachman Lo Kash. And here we turn to the bottom of Ayin Zayin Amrah. The Gemara says the following: although we will compel a person to divorce his wife after 10 years at the childless, for the sake of period, we're only going to do it b'dvarim. We'll try to convince him and pressure him, and maybe even put him into Nidui and Shamta, but we will not beat him up. But our Mishnah of Kofin Osalahotzi, if he refuses to divorce his wife and she has a claim and grounds to divorce, is then the Shota will even beat him up. Maskif Lo Rav Abba, based on a pasuk in Mishlei, how can you tell me that if we force a person after 10 years of being childless to divorce his wife, it means we force him verbally, and that's considered kfir? But the pasuk in Mishlei says, "B'dvarim lo yivaser evet." Notice liyaser b'dvarim is not considered kfir. So again, we go back to the original question about Gemara. Why doesn't the Mishnah mention the din of Rav Tachlifa that if he's married for 10 years childless, then we have to force him to divorce his wife? Where it says Elam Rabbi Abba Hava Hava Shoti. In other words, whether or not it's the Mishnah's case that we force him to divorce his wife, or in the case where Rabbi Tachlifa says he was married 10 years and he was childless, in both cases, the kfir be b'shoti. We will physically force him to divorce his wife. So now what's the difference between the two? Why does the Mishnah leave out the case of 10 years?